Hi guys, Simon here from the Triple F. I hope you're all well. Sorry that I haven't posted a lot recently, but I've just started a new full-time job, which is obviously great news, but it just means I'll be releasing most episodes on weekends going forward. This episode is an Under the Floodlights special on former Man United and Everton winger Andrei Kanchelskis. Regular co-host Matt tells me all about why he was so fond of Kanchelskis growing up, his thoughts on his autobiography, and what type of player the Ukrainian was. I hope you guys enjoy as Andrei Kanchelskis goes under the floodlights. So, I mean, I'm pretty much going into this as blind and as blank as possible because I vaguely remember bits of Kanchelskis from my youth, sort of seeing his face on Panini sticker books here and there, and seeing a bit of him on TV. The one thing I do remember is I'm pretty sure the trick most kids tried to do when they were young, the whole standing on the ball with a weird salute thing. God knows why he did that and what the whole purpose of that was, but it was a great trick to sort of to try and imitate when you were a kid.
Yeah, it was. I think that was it. I remember him doing it for, was it Everton?
Yeah, I think it was Everton, yeah.
Yeah, and yeah, bizarre, entirely bizarre. So that was after the period of time that I fell in love with Kanchelskis at Manchester United, obviously. So, yeah, and I'll be honest, I don't think I've really thought about Kanchelskis for going on 20 years now. As a player, as a person, he kind of faded into obscurity in terms of English football. Moved back home to Ukraine and Russia and did some fairly mediocre managerial jobs and everything. So it was nice to reinvestigate what he's been up to and what he's been doing for the purposes of the podcast, really, and the YouTube. So yeah, it was a trip down memory lane for me for sure. Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Brilliant. Because I mean the whole obscure sort of side of it, like you mentioned, is an odd one because he must have really gone into obscurity because it was almost a name. When you mentioned that you wanted to do an Under the Floodlight special on Kanchelskis, I just for some reason had this, oh yeah, I remember Kanchelskis. I was like, how could I forget somebody that was quite a prominent player for United, was a big figure for Everton as well. So it was a strange one. But yeah, he more or less, like you say, went completely into obscurity and off the radar, which is an odd one. But if you can sort of tell us what he's been up to under that radar or off of the radar, it'd be great to hear.
Yeah, I mean, it's nothing to shout home about, I don't think. I think managerially, the list of clubs, I mean, I've got it here. Literally all of them I have never heard of before. So in terms of Russian sort of C League teams.
Knowing you're a bit of a football geek, that's quite an achievement.
I was going to say, as a self-confessed football hipster, I'm ashamedly, I don't know any of these. Novgorod, Nizhny Novgorod, as an assistant manager, I've heard of those. But other than that, Torpedo Zil Moscow, another Moscow side. Who else? Navbahor Namangan, who are an Uzbekistan Super League side. So, I don't want to cast aspersions on these clubs. I'm sure they have their own traditions and their own qualities, but certainly not of a calibre that you might have expected given his professional football career. So it's kind of a tale of two halves, almost, to use a bit of a football cliche there. You've got this really quite stellar footballing career as a player, and then as a manager, he has sort of flitted between short-term contracts rather than any kind of long-term managerial posting. So, it's a strange one, really. It's a real strange one, given the calibre of the managers that he worked under. You'd have imagined he'd have picked something up that's worth carrying on to that managerial profession. But yeah, it's not to be so far.
Not quite the heights of other Old Trafford legends then.
He hasn't sort of matched the Steve Bruce, even matched Steve Bruce or Brian Robson or Mark Hughes or any of these managers from a similar era, for sure. So yeah, it'll be interesting to see where he goes now. I wonder if it's potentially there's an expensive divorce in the mix there as well, and personal life hasn't been ideal. But yeah, it's a real shame. So it's a career that I followed incredibly closely. He was my sort of first player that I fell in love with after Mark Hughes, I would have said, back in the day. So started following Manchester United about 1990, towards the start of Ferguson's reign. But late 80s, when I was vaguely aware, because I was born in 84, so then I first started following football around about the World Cup in 1990. So, and Kanchelskis was one who just had this sort of foreign exoticism to him, because at the time, I think in that first Premier League season, for instance, there was only about 13 other foreign players in the entire division. So it was this great unknown that you didn't know what to expect from him. So that fast-paced, fleet-of-footed winger that really was a little bit alien to the English game, I think, at the time. That was something just remarkable for me. I don't know if, you remember him from the sticker books, but were there any similar players that you can think of at Arsenal, for instance, your club?
I suppose Anders Limpar. Anders Limpar comes to mind. I think it was Swedish centre forward, winger. He's the one that sort of springs to mind. But I'm just trying to think who those sort of 13 players could be. I mean, was Cantona possibly one of those as well, do you think?
I think so, yeah. And it's interesting you speak of Anders Limpar, for instance, as well. He had a similar post-career sort of dip in terms of, weight as well. I think he ballooned in weight a little bit, and his fitness dwindled massively. Kanchelskis did the same, but they had that sort of flair that England lacked at the time. I think Glenn Hoddle, maybe towards the back end of the 80s, could have sort of had that. Mark Hughes, maybe. But those wingers, those fast-paced wingers, I think until the mid-90s were a bit of a rarity. So for me, that was really exciting. And it was sort of me and myself really loving Kanchelskis. My friend at the time, my best friend at the time, Mark, he absolutely loved Schmeichel. So we had this sort of attraction to these foreign investments. And it was a really exciting time to be a Man United fan.
If you're enjoying Under the Floodlights, then you might enjoy our other podcasts. The Triple F Show is jam-packed with general football discussion. The Magic Of is a show which profiles special clubs from all over the world to find out all about their history, culture and their fan base. And the Triple F Cinema is where guests and I review weird and wacky football films. So this book, Matt, I mean, there must be some interesting stuff in there. Please fill me in.
Well, initially I was like, oh, great, this is really exciting. This will tell me all about Kanchelskis, Ferguson and the blow-up that happened when he left the club and everything like that. But it was clearly published in an attempt to make a little bit of money out of the Russian World Cup.
Right.
So picture of Kanchelskis in full flight on the cover of this Russian flag behind him, and I think the title was called Russian Winters, things like that. And it was a massive opening chapter about the World Cup in Russia, and it was essentially a real PR job, because at the time when it was released, going to Russia for the World Cup was really quite a scary prospect. I mean, it turned out all right in the end, but after France and all the bother that they had over there with the Russian fans, the idea of traveling to Russia to the World Cup was just a ridiculous notion. So for some reason, Kanchelskis looks to have been co-opted into writing this kind of publicity sort of chapter about the World Cup and how friendly it will be, and there will be problems, but you should be fine, and all this kind of thing. So it was really bizarre to read to begin with, and he clearly uses the book to sort of hang on to those connections that he made at Manchester United, for instance. So there's a foreword by Ryan Giggs who tells of Kanchelskis' impact and how good a player he was and everything like that, and blowing smoke up his ass, which was fair enough. If you're going to get someone to do it, you might as well get Ryan Giggs, who is a pretty big name. But I often found that a little bit strange, because when Giggs came into the United team a short while after Kanchelskis, so that shifted Lee Sharp over to the right-hand side to his position, who then kind of usurped Kanchelskis' position within United. So it was like a bit strange to consider that choice of somebody, but apparently they're still friends, so that's nice to see. But yeah, it delves very minimally into his private life. He talks about his wife, who's now married one of Russia's biggest pop stars, bizarrely. His daughter and son. His son plays rugby, bizarrely, and everything like that. And it's all this kind of sugar-coated sort of history of his career and personal life. So there are some moments of where he loses a child and in childbirth and everything like that. But apart from that, it is very sort of surface level investigation into life, really. There are more interesting stories in his career to tell that he hasn't touched upon. The contract negotiations with Ferguson, for instance, were pretty shocking by all accounts. His agent, I forget his name now, was he connected? And by connected, I mean sort of mafia related.
Yeah.
There was an argument for that. Bribes were potentially placed, for Ferguson to take, who a brown envelope with thousands of pounds of cash was handed to Ferguson, who then in turn handed it to the club. So his honour was left intact in that situation. And to this day, nobody really knows what that was for. But it stands to reason that Dynamo Kiev, his former club, would stand to benefit from a future percentage of any future sale. There was some argument that maybe that was part of it, to try and motivate Ferguson to sell. So it's all very, very cloak and daggers and everything. But Ferguson said at the time it was real Godfather stuff. What does he say? Real stuff, amazing stuff. Couldn't believe it. And the interviewer says, not threatening at all. He goes, I think there were a few threats, all right. Absolutely. So you've just got to, if Ferguson's coming out and saying that, and he's a hard bargainer, he's not going to just stand by and let you walk over him. So if you come into Fergie with those kind of demands, and even Fergie's been a little bit shook up by the whole situation, then it must mean business. And real interesting time in the history for him, I think.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's quite a shocking one to hear. It's good to see that Fergie didn't go down the same path as another fellow Scot of his, George Graham, in actually accepting that bung. So, that's good on Fergie for that. But I suppose that's kind of what you get when you get involved with. The allegations of being involved with Russian mafia. I think it's almost a stereotypical thing, sort of linked with almost any Russian player when they play for a club. What are their connections? And I'm sure it doesn't always ring true, but it's something that always sort of looms over a lot of those players, or managers, or even owners' kind of heads, really.
It does. And it's a shame, because, that's probably only a couple of people who have sort of spoilt it for everybody else. But it's Kanchelskis wasn't necessarily the best people person, I don't think. So he had pretty significant fallings out with Hiddink, for instance, up at Rangers. The Russian coach in advance of Euro 96 fell out. I mean, he led a sort of a party of half a dozen players refusing to play for Russia because they didn't believe in the appointment of the head coach there. So he's not one to shy away from a difficult situation, shall we say.
Mm. I mean, I don't know how much truth you were able to sort of get in terms of his sort of personality and his character from the book, but I mean, are you able to sort of describe what kind of person Kanchelskis is?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think he is pretty sure of his talents, I think, and he came from a relatively poor background. He grew up in Ukraine, so in the shadow of the collapse of the Soviet Empire that was on the cards. So poverty was not too far away from the family. So he had it quite a difficult upbringing in that sense, but his football really took him out of that environment to a large degree. And I think with Russia and athletes at the time, you were headhunted fairly early on in your childhood. If you showed any promise whatsoever, they would essentially uproot you from your family and then put you in the camps, to sort of the sporting camps, to encourage that development a little bit. So it was really quite a sort of factory farming process of sport for all manner of sports, whether it was ice hockey, basketball, gymnastics, obviously, and later tennis. So he kind of fell into that pattern a little bit. So as a result of that, he found a little bit of a way out and managed to develop his skills and talents and traveled pretty much from Ukraine to Russia, and then really made himself quite a well-known quantity at Dynamo Kiev. So that was his real big step forward in terms of his career, in that sense. So yeah, it was, you get a real sense of his identity, that work ethic. He's not going to let that slip. So he's fought for it. So that kind of character building, you're never going to find that in, say, England. To a large degree, I don't think the majority of players in England at the time and maybe now won't have that difficulty being brought up, so they won't know that character side, that side of their character, to fight for everything that's there for them. So yeah, it's a real interesting upbringing, really. That collapse of the Soviet Union as well in 91, 92. It came at probably the right time for his career development in that sense. It allowed him to move abroad, allowed him to bring family across and earn the kind of money that would really help his family. So in that sense, it was a real boost for him.
If you're interested in coming on the show for an Under the Floodlights special to talk about your favourite player or manager, please email the FFF2021@gmail.com or DM the FFF84 on Twitter. All contact details will be in the episode description. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the FFF. For those that aren't of the age that you and I are, or that just aren't as aware of Kanchelskis' kind of talents and just of his sort of playing days, what kind of player was he?
Yeah, he was. He's not necessarily a player that you'd find or you'd recognise today. I don't think. I think if he was around today, he would have been usurped by those, those forward-thinking wing backs that we've got today. The likes of Trent Alexander-Arnold and things like that. So he probably would struggle at the moment, unless he sort of moved inside into a more central position. But yeah, he was a right winger to begin with. That really quick, fast-paced right winger that Ferguson was desperate for at the time. So he came in back end of 1990 and only played one game in his first season. But that last season in the the first division, as it were, that Leeds won, he played a considerable number of games there. And that right winger, fast-paced, incredibly fast shot, that hard shot that he had on both feet as well. So he was a real danger man that defenses weren't familiar with. I don't think anybody sort of coming at them at pace. Largely unheard of at the time, I think, with those sort of lumbering centre backs that used to be quite common back in the day. So yeah, he was a real fresh right winger, really, and it was exciting to watch.
Did he win a title? Or I mean, how many sort of trophies did he win when he was at United? Do you know?
So he was only there for 4 years, but yeah, he won a fair few competitions. Won the League Cup to begin with, which was his first competition win. He won the inaugural sort of Premier League season as well, where that was a real season where he had an impact. But beyond that, largely sort of relegated to then Everton and then Rangers beyond that. So domestically, after United, there wasn't necessarily much to shout about. So it was always more of a short-term investment, really. He didn't really stay long enough to witness any enduring success, which maybe it has impacted on his legacy, and that's where we find him today. Without that kind of legacy and career to speak of at the moment.
Why do you think there was that drop off then? Because he was at Man United from what kind of age? Like early 20s?
Injuries played a big part of it for him. So he did suffer a lot, and you tend to find that a lot with those quick wingers, especially in quite a hard tackling game that it was back in the day. So when I first started watching it, it wasn't, it was a completely different game.
Well, you had the likes of Julian Dix to
yeah, exactly. And even that Arsenal back four, that wasn't, that was
it wasn't an easy task.
No, exactly. So it's difficult. When he moved from Everton to Fiorentina, for instance, he played next to no games, had next to no impact, essentially. He suffered a horrendous leg break. I think it was Taribo West, if you remember that name.
Oh yeah, I remember the hair.
Absolutely, I always remember he was one of the players to buy on Championship Manager. But,
I just remember. Sorry, going off on a bit of a tangent.
That's okay.
Taribo West. What I loved about him was that he would color coordinate his. I think he would wear like beads in his hair, and for whichever club he was playing in, he would always color coordinate them with the kit.
He did, yeah. I remember him playing for Nigeria with the green and white. Really short dreads, wasn't it? Really short dreads.
Yeah,
I remember that. But yeah, he was playing for Inter Milan and at the time, and broke Kanchelskis' leg, which really, really struggled. It struggled to get any kind of traction again with Fiorentina, unfortunately. So yeah, moved back over to the UK to play for Rangers, and had a degree of success with them, with the league a couple of times, and then the cup and everything like that. So he had a little bit more success, but then again fell out with the manager. I think it was Gus Hiddink, if I'm right in saying, who just essentially sowed the seeds for Rangers' demise financially at the time. So really bizarre management structure and everything like that. Just ploughed loads of money into it. Kind of did what Leeds did back in the day, you know, ploughed so much money, paid so much money to all these players and everything.
Peter Ridsdale.
Yeah, and that kind of management and ownership struggle didn't help Kanchelskis' career. So yeah, and after that kind of petered out a little bit, and it's a real shame for me. I was just so excited when I first watched him. So to watch that career kind of dwindle to, you know, next to nothing was a real shame.
Is there a favourite goal that you can think of?
Yeah, and I was reminded actually of the third goal that Mason Greenwood scored against Tottenham recently, and it was a similar kind of fashion. He came in on the right hand side and just powered it so hard that, you know, the keeper couldn't do anything. Even if he got a full hand to it, couldn't do anything to stop the goal. So it was kind of similar to that those were his archetypal goals. So it's hard to pick one, for instance. There's a goal against Southampton in the 91-92 season, I think it is. Dennis Irwin delivers the ball and Kanchelskis hits it first time on the volley, and it's such a sweet strike. It's nothing unusual necessarily, but you can see the follow through and you can see the pose almost. If you froze the frame just at that moment, it would be just this perfect
textbook.
You know, those little figures you used to get on the football trophies you get in under 12s or something.
Yeah.
It was that kind of image, you know, of Kanchelskis scoring a goal, and it was that was typical of him, you know. And you do, you know, you could do a lot worse than spending half an hour watching his career highlights of assists. There's a really good sort of clip of all his assists and all his goals that he's scored in his career. Definitely recommend you have a look at those because they're all relatively similar, you know, coming in on the right hand side. A lot of the time using his pace to beat that last man. If you've got a high press, you've fucked it. So it was great to watch Michael just launch that ball across the pitch and Kanchelskis pick it up and run onto it. It was such a great image, you know, and he scored a great goal against QPR, I think, in the 93-94 season that way, with Schmeichel launching the ball and Kanchelskis picking it up and seeing it through. So yeah, it was just a pleasure to watch him on the ball, you know, and I haven't seen the likes of it since, I don't think.
No. Is there any other stories that are sort of worth mentioning that were in the book?
Not necessarily in the book as such, because, like I say, it is such a soft investigation into his life. You know, it's not necessarily the warts and all account that I would have hoped for. No. I was really excited to pick it up, and I thought, oh, great! I'll be able to learn all about all the intrigue surrounding his transfers and everything like that. What his relationship was with his managers, with the Russian team, and everything like that. As a football hipster, I was really excited to know all about his relationships with Ferguson, with Hiddink, with Lobanovsky as well, the Dynamo Kiev manager back in the day, who's one of the great managers that we don't tend to hear much about. He basically says how much of an impact he had on him, but really doesn't necessarily delve into any detail about that relationship. So that maybe explains how he's not necessarily made it as a manager, because he hasn't interpreted those lessons that he would have learned into his future career. So that was a bit of a shame. But yeah, it was, you know, when I said I was excited to read it, I wasn't lying. But then when I read it, I was a little bit disappointed. So yeah, it was a bit of a letdown, really, in the end. But like, it was only $2.99, so you know, it's not a complete waste of money.
No. Yeah, I can sort of understand your disappointment, because when you have these autobiographies, regardless of if whether they're a footballer or a sports star, just, you know, celebrity, you want that sort of warts and all cover, don't you? Really, you want it to be as much of a sort of deep exploration or an inquisition as much as possible. But yeah, when it doesn't really give you much of an idea of that person's character or too much of an idea of that person's life, it feels like a bit of a letdown, really.
Mm. Yeah, it was, but there are plenty of YouTube clips and everything and interviews and everything that maybe can fill the gap a little bit. So I searched out some really interesting clips, say Ferguson talking about the transfer and things like that, transfers he regrets having to make and things like that, which shone some light into it, which was really interesting. So yeah, it's certainly something that I would like to investigate further, shall we say. So yeah, I'm not done yet anyway, so I'd like to come back for a part 2 because I'd like to do a bit more of a deep dive into his career, find out a little bit more about the controversy surrounding him. I think there's more to learn than just in this superficial book that he released.
Sorry, were you saying Fergie regrets signing Andrei Kanchelskis?
No, it's one of the transfers that he sort of having to let him go at the time was one of his regrets, given the controversy around his contract negotiations and his agent and his threatening behaviour and all that kind of business. So yeah.
Okay, so that goes on the same list as Jaap Stam then, does it?
Yeah, not necessarily. I think it may be on page 2 or 3 of that list, but yeah, it was a real shame. But I think by the time he was edged out anyway, he would have lasted maybe 1 or 2 more seasons with United before, obviously, the class of '92 came in with Beckham. Nobody's getting past Beckham at the time, but maybe that paved the way for him to some degree. But he'll have quite a fond memory in the hearts and minds of many Man United fans for his input. He played 120 odd games for United, so it's nothing to sniff at. But it's just a real shame he couldn't perhaps settle in England, perhaps settle with the club, and personally and professionally he could have done more. But yeah, we'll just have to be thankful that we got what we did from him.
Yeah. Do you have a top 5 favourite all-time Man U players? And would Kanchelskis go on that list if it did?
I think he probably would do for me, only because of what he meant to me as a young United fan. So, like I say, growing up with my best friend Mark at the time, we were completely obsessed with United and absolutely loved everything that we devoured any kind of Match magazine, Shoot magazine, anything to do with him. But we would kind of try and replicate the goals, replicate the kits and everything like that. So in my formative football fan years, then yeah, he stands for a lot. So that for that reason alone, I think he would make the top 5. Difficult to say, you've put me on the spot now, but I can't see beyond that kind of era for me. Schmeichel was one as well. Roy Keane, another, a little bit later than those two. But in the past few years, it's hard to imagine anybody that would come onto that kind of list. I don't know. Mark Hughes was another one. Saw him scoring the Cup Winners' Cup. Gordon Strachan I met, which was bizarre because he only played for us for a little while, but he was really cool. And potentially Ryan Giggs. I think everybody at the time was absolutely in love with Ryan Giggs, especially that goal against Arsenal in the semi-final at Villa Park.
Yeah, don't remind me. Him and his rug chest.
That hairy chest, yeah. And yeah, maybe even Solskjaer would creep onto that list for what he achieved for us against Bayern Munich as well. So yeah, you've got to mean something rather than just what you achieve on the pitch. I think you've got to contribute more than just a goal and assist sort of ratio for me to have any kind of affection for you. So that said, in the last few years, it's difficult to pick anybody out of that caliber beyond, say, I don't know, your Juan Mata, who created a charity foundation, and Marcus Rashford and all his endeavours and things like that. You've got to really, for me, do something more than just play football, I think.
That's why I asked favourite players opposed to greatest players, because with favourite players, there is a difference. Obviously, for me, a favourite player is something that you're sort of drawn to. In a weird sense, I look at this is going to be controversial with a lot of Arsenal fans. They're probably not going to like me saying this, but there was something about Sam Nasri that I absolutely loved as a player, but when he left for Manchester City, obviously he's regarded as a Judas, and I can understand why fans wouldn't like me saying it. But he scored one of my favourite ever Arsenal goals, and that was against Porto in the Champions League. It was just a wonderful sight to behold. So yeah, there is a difference between sort of what could be considered the greatest kind of players, comparing that to your favourite players. For whatever reason, we as fans all have different reasons why we gravitate towards those players. So I completely understand what you're saying.
Yeah, it's an interesting debate, isn't it? I think it's one that'll rumble on for me, and I think it's never been something I've ever really sort of considered, to be honest, my favourite players. So now you've put me on the spot. It's quite an interesting reflection, I think, to decide that. So yeah, I'm going to be thinking about that all night now. So
I'll bring you back on, and we'll both go through our top 5 favourite players.
We could probably field an Arsenal v Man United 11, I think, and that would be quite an interesting discussion to have.
Definitely, mate. Definitely. Yeah, we'll have to pen that one in. But no, thanks again for coming on, Matt. Really appreciate it. It was great to hear so much interesting and quite eyebrow raising stuff about Kanchelskis. But yeah, it really was interesting. And yeah, thanks again for coming on, mate.
No, you're very welcome.
Cool. Take care, buddy.
Yeah. Cheers now. Bye.
Bye. Thank you so much for listening to the Triple F. If you could please drop a like on our Facebook page, subscribe to the YouTube channel, and follow us on Twitter, that would be massively appreciated. Hope you're all keeping safe, and thanks again for listening to the Triple F.